Fear has taken hold of Nicaraguan exiles in Costa Rica. The number of defenders and activists who have migrated as a result of Roberto's murder in the last 6 months, taking advantage of the UN's Safe Mobility Program to leave for Spain, Canada, and other countries, is immense.
On Tuesday, the missing suspect in the murder of retired Major Roberto Samcam, a Nicaraguan refugee in Costa Rica, was captured near the capital, almost 8 months after he was shot at his doorstep. I'm Juliana Ramazzini, and this is Central America in Minutes. I've been covering this case since last year. Samcam's wife, Claudia Vargas, is calling the crime a political assassination tied to the Ortega Murillo regime in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes, an original podcast by El Faro English.
The brazen murder on foreign soil of a former top Nicaraguan military leader who once fought alongside Daniel Ortega during the Sandinista revolution shook thousands of exiles living in Costa Rica. Like many disaffected former Sandinistas, Roberto Samcam later became a strong opponent of the Ortega Murillo regime, which is why he and his family had been exiled in Costa Rica since 2018. Last year, he even reported to the local intelligence authorities that he feared for his safety. He also warned of possible espionage networks tied to the Nicaraguan regime. Days later, he was murdered at his front door. According to his wife, Claudia Vargas, the administration of outgoing President Rodrigo Chavez has yet to comment on the murder. And she's concerned that the new government of Laura Fernandez, who has called herself the president of continuity, may remain silent too. Vargas is also a private party to the prosecution. Her lawyers have called the murder a crime of state terrorism directly involving the Nicaraguan dictatorship. Close quote. The opposition has accused the government of incompetence. They say a possible Nicaraguan state-sponsored hit squad on their soil is a matter of national security and international law. On Tuesday, the Judicial Investigation Agency, or OIJ, arrested a fifth suspect, Luis Fernando Carvajal Fernandez, a 21-year-old Costa Rican accused of being the shooter. Judicial authorities profiled the group. They say they live in a neighborhood controlled by organized crime. Carvajal has a short rap sheet, but they say he wasn't a high-profile criminal. The Director General of the OIJ says that Carvajal was the last suspect that they had yet to capture. However, the masterminds behind this crime remain unknown. At least 2 other Nicaraguan refugees have been murdered in the region in recent years, and another dissident faced 2 assassination attempts in 2021 and 2024. Claudia Vargas says she will not leave Costa Rica and she will not remain silent.
And that, of course, makes me afraid. But I've also worked on my fear, because that's another thing we learn as women. We live our lives going out into the streets, knowing that the streets are not safe. And sometimes we go home, knowing that our homes are not safe. We learn to live in fear, and I don't want to live in fear.
Hey, it's Roman. Juliana will get back to it in a moment. But first, I wanted to take a second to ask you, do you work at a radio station? Every week, we explain Central America in under 10 minutes. Our journalism crosses borders. Shout out, by the way, to our friends at KEPW in Eugene, Oregon. To put Central America on the airwaves, shoot us an email at english@elfaro.net.
Next to Guatemala, for a major development in the case against leading publisher and newspaperman Jose Rubén Zamora. Yesterday, a criminal court ordered Zamora's release to house arrest. He is awaiting trial in 2 cases. The first for supposed money laundering, and the second for alleged obstruction of justice and document tampering. It was the second case that had kept him in prison, despite an order for his release in the first case last year. The tactics of Guatemalan prosecutors mirror authoritarian regimes around the world. This tied a thick knot keeping Zamora in prison. Prosecutors even went after his lawyers, former staff of his newspaper El Periódico, and columnists writing about the case. The judge noted that he spent 1,295 days in detention, almost exceeding the minimum sentence for the obstruction of justice case. The defense argued that the reasonable time frame for trying him in this case has already expired. Zamora ran a leading newspaper in Guatemala for over 2 decades, with unflinching coverage of corruption, organized crime, and impunity. Unsurprisingly, the public prosecutor's office opposed his release. He won't be allowed to leave the country and will have to regularly check in with prosecutors. If we've learned anything from the ups and downs of this case over the last 3.5 years, press freedom advocates are holding their breath. The Supreme Court of Justice will very likely have the last say on both his house arrest and Zamora's ultimate fate.
Okay, one last plug for the day. Do you get our newsletter in your inbox? For a deeper look at what's happening in Central America every week, go to elfaro.net/en and subscribe to help us topple the dictatorship of the algorithm.
Last, we turn to El Salvador. The human rights organization Socorro Jurídico Humanitario now records over 94,000 arrests and at least 470 deaths in prison under the state of exception in El Salvador. The measures have been in effect since March 2022, after the breakdown of a pact between the gangs and the Bukele government. Of those, they estimate that the cause of death was violent in 1/3 of cases. The Attorney General's office has not investigated or prosecuted any authorities for the deaths. Blanca Osmilda Castro Quijada is one of the 35 women who died during the state of exception, as documented by Socorro Jurídico. We published a report on her case on Wednesday. When police officers arrived at her home in Santa Ana on June 1st, 2022, they found no evidence of illicit gang association, but they arrested her anyway. 2,000 police documents obtained by El Faro coincide with what her family says. There were no gangs in her neighborhood. For 2 years, polls have shown Bukele's high popularity, but also growing fears of voicing opinions in public. On February 4th, newspaper La Prensa Gráfica announced new polling reporting that 92% of Salvadorans approve of de facto President Nayib Bukele. Of the hundreds of known deaths in custody during the state of exception, El Faro has documented how some relatives denied knowing their loved ones out of fear of the Bukele government. As for Blanca Osmilda, a relative and 3 neighbors asked that El Faro withhold their names out of fear of arrest. You can read more about her case at elfaro.net/en. At the same time, her relative says she supports the state of exception, with some reservations. Her daughter can go to school without being harassed by gangs, but the family expects little to nothing from the state following her death. The only thing her relative told us was, it would be good if they conducted a thorough investigation.
Thanks for streaming Central American Minutes. Juliana and I wrote today's episode with support from the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives and sound design by Omnia. Find us wherever you do your streaming, and we'll be back next week. Hasta pronto.